Well, hi there, I'm Noah Bradley. This is Handmade House TV, and on today's episode I'm going to share with you the final fourth of our series here, dealing with the best species of wood you can use when you build your log home. So stay tuned. Well, all right, today we're going to talk about, I'm standing in front of a poplar tree. To be exact, it's a tulip poplar tree. It's a very abundant tree here in the state of Virginia and pretty much throughout the entire mid-Atlantic. It was extremely popular in building vintage log cabins, and that is the reason how I came up with the 4 different species of wood to use when building your log home. And that is that whenever I've explored through the decades long of my career vintage log cabins, almost all of them have fallen into these 4 different species. There are others that have appeared, particularly in those log cabins that were not solid one species only. If a log cabin was built using multiple species, you can be surprised the kind of wood that I found. 2 of them that come to mind is hickory and gum. I would never use either one of those because neither one of them is really, both of them are prone to rot, and both of them are miserable to work with an axe or with a saw. But we're standing today in front of poplar. Now, if you remember, we did chestnut first of all, and then we moved over to oak, and then we covered pine. And today we're talking about poplar. Tulip poplar. If you look at the leaves of a tulip poplar tree, they actually look like a tulip in bloom. I guess that's how it got the name. And also, oddly enough, that the blooms in the springtime of a tulip poplar look like the bloom of a tulip. So it's interesting. But the virtues with poplar is that it's extremely abundant in our particular area. It grows fast. It tends not to, especially grown in a woodland situation like this, it will grow faster than any of the neighboring trees, and it will shoot for the sky, and it won't branch. It won't create a whole lot of knots along the way. So you end up with a tall, knot-free, abundant species of wood that gets very large in size. This is a wonderful size to build a log home out of, right here, what we're looking at the back of us here. So it's really wonderful. So I wanted to cover the pros and cons of it. And again, we were using a scale, and we were going through the various angles, considerations with regard to using logs, and we'll get started into that. The first of those is workability. How does poplar work when it comes to working? Poplar works absolutely incredible. It's a joy to work with. It shapes really well. A saw or an axe goes through it. It's a joy to work with, and the finished result of it is a smooth, beautiful, grain-free, basically looking wood. I just love it. It works really great. And then when it comes time to moving the bark off of it, a lot of people will actually use the bark to make bark baskets out of it, that you can fold the bark once you remove it, and you can make baskets out of it. I've seen where primitive people, when they wanted to get into their house real quickly, that they would actually use the bark off a poplar tree for roofing shingles for a year or two, while they were busy making the wood shingles for the rest of the home. Particularly, the bark can be a little bit of a challenge if you saw it during the deepest winter months, December and January, but pretty much for the rest of the year, it just comes off real easy with just an axe. Get it started, and it'll almost fall off of the tree itself. So there's clearly a joy to that. And it's not as heavy as oak. It weighs about the same as what pine does in lifting it. When it comes to rot resistance, I have given poplar between a 6 and 8. So I gave the workability, I gave it a 9. Rot resistance about a 6 to 8, which is just about as high as the rest of them. I gave oak an 8, but this is a little bit of 6 to 8, and that is that if you use poplar on your cabin, and you chink your cabin correctly, as I point out in my Chinking Academy course and even some of the free episodes here on YouTube, and the second thing is you keep it up off the ground. You never let poplar touch the ground. You never let it try to keep your foundation at least 8 inches, but preferably even more than that. If you're building with poplar log, keep it up off the ground. Don't allow any shrubbery to grow up next to the cabin and hold water near the log cabin. If you do that, poplar will last you hundreds of years. But if you fail on those categories, if you leave poplar on the ground, it'll be compost within a year's time. So it has great rot resistance, but you got to chink it right. You got to keep it up off the ground, and you got to keep it relatively dry. It is not as prone as far as insect damage goes. I gave it also an 8, so it's up there with the big boys. Maybe not as great as the others. Sometimes you can have a little bit of wood borer action, a little bit of coming in, but it's nowhere near as bad as what pine is. It's much better than pine. And then the final category is attractiveness, and I gave it a 9. Why is it so attractive? Why is it right up there at the top of it? And that is that, first of all, because they're big, massive beasts and they hew really well, they're beautiful. It's a very attractive, it's a very impressive log. It also has a smooth texture to it quite often, better than any other log I'm aware of. Maybe white pine falls into that category, but you can actually go over and touch it. When you get a lot of rain over the years, it tends to actually, can be a slight erosion of the water weathering it over the years, and will actually give it a little bit of a contour, it'll make it even smoother. It's a very, very strokeable, maybe not as much as a baby's bottom, but it's a smooth, wonderful log. There's no doubt about it. And the only negative associated with poplar, and with Tulip Poplar, is that it has, I think part of the reason of its name is pop, and that is that when you hew it, you really need to put a lot of concentration in cutting it at the right time of the year, in making sure that you cut your logs extra long, at least 2 feet, preferably 4 feet longer than you need, because there's always a main crack in your logs that happens right down the very center of the log and opens the log up. It's not a problem with weathering 99% of the time. It's not really an ugliness to it, other than when you first see it, it's like, oh my baby, it just cracked. But and once the cabin is finished, it's aged in place, you'll never notice these cracks. All logs will get some. Poplar is the king of popping. But because of the end grain can dry out faster than the rest of the log, that there's a lot more popping that happens in the ends of an oak log than what is in other species. Now, a lot of people will ask me about whether or not to put a coat of paint or a sealer on the end grains of their logs in order to prevent that popping from happening. And I can say that I have tried it repeatedly throughout my career. It sounds like it should work. Some people say it does work, but my experience of it is that it is a waste of time and material. That once a poplar is inevitably going to crack. Once it cracks, that paint is not going to do that crack any different, and it'll immediately open up along that crack, and you'll end up with a painted log. So typically the severe cracking, if it happens at all, is on the end grain, and it comes in a foot or two from the end grain and pops open, and you can sever it off. A lot of times how our ancestors would take care of poplar, how they take care of most log cabin issues, period, is that they would cut the tree, they would hew it, remove the bark, and then they would notch it and set it on the log cabin. Once it's setting in the log cabin, once there's logs above it that are providing weight to it and everything else, it's done. It's not going to move, it's not going to crack, it's not going to twist. Well, it might twist, but that rarely happens. But it will hold it in place a whole lot better. So if I was building a log cabin, say 18 foot long, I would cut my logs probably 22 or even a little bit longer if I could. And when I was notching it, I would leave those extra ends, that extra length sticking out beyond the log cabin. And then maybe once I got up a few courses, I could come back and I would cut all my logs to length at that time, nice and pretty at the end, much like I go through in the Log Cabin Academy. And if you haven't signed up for the Log Cabin Academy, you need to sign up for the Log Cabin Academy. If you're thinking about building a log cabin, don't ignore the wisdom and experience that I have come up with through the course of building hundreds of log cabins, touring thousands of them, building them for decades now. There's a secret or an insight that you learn every time you build one, and after a while you accumulate quite a collection of them. Come over to Handmade Houses, take a look at some of the log cabins I've built over there, and consider signing up for at least the Log Cabin Academy, but I highly encourage you to do the Handmade House Guild. There's a lot of stuff in there that even if you want to build just a log cabin, you need to have the information in your head so that you can move forward and build a log cabin without any regrets. Build one that you're really proud of in the end, one that is very comfortable to live in, that looks like it belongs in the environment, and just one that you take pride in. And anyway, thank you so much for tuning in here to Handmade House TV. Thank you for letting me share with you these 4 different species of logs. Remember, the best logs that you can find are the best logs that you can find locally on your property. You can use these 4 different, or all 4 of them, or any one of them, and you'll end up with a fine log cabin. But very likely you'll have a species of wood on your land that's not covered in these 4, and that very well might be the species of log you want to use when you build your log home. I hope you build your log home. I believe you can build your log home. Anyone can build a log cabin. Most of the log cabins that you find historically in the woods or whatever else, these absolutely gorgeous structures that have had very little maintenance given to them over centuries of time, that are breathtakingly beautiful, that are more beautiful than most architects today design houses. They were built by individuals just like you, with far less education, with far more primitive tools than what you have available to you. And they were able to put together a log home that stands as a testament today, decades and centuries later, to the craftsmanship that they had. There's a beauty to homes that are built by individuals who haven't perfected their skills. Seems like the more we perfect our skills, the more we end up with something that looks manufactured when we get finished with it. You start to lose that hand craftsmanship to it, that little bit of quirkiness that goes on in building a home. So I hope that you build your dream home. It's much easier to build a dream log cabin than it is to live with the regret of never having tried. Anyway, we thank you so much for tuning in here to Handmade House TV today, and I look forward to seeing you here again on our next episode. So until then, you guys take care. Until then, bye now.